You may have seen a few headlines going around Doctor Who Twitter and Doctor Who Facebook and everything this past week, talking about how Chris Chibnall expects future showrunners of Doctor Who to completely ignore everything that he does, and this has been dubbed as Chris Chibnall admitting that he failed. Chris Chibnall admits that he has done a terrible job and everyone's going to ignore everything that he says. However, what you could actually do is listen to the interview itself to find out what he's talking about. So this is an interview that he's done for the Reality Bomb podcast. This is episode 106A, Chris Chibnall interview, where podcast host Joy Piedmont spends about 50 minutes talking with former showrunner of Doctor Who, Chris Chibnall. It's a really, really good interview. There's a link to it in the description below, so I highly recommend you check it out. The Radio Free Skaro interview he did the other week was really, really good as well, from Gallifrey 1. Basically, if Chris Chibnall appears on a podcast, definitely listen to that podcast because they're really entertaining. I encourage you to listen to the full interview, but what we'll do just for the purposes of this topic is just listen to the segment which has got all of the drama and all of the discourse going. Let's listen to a clip from Reality Bomb.
Your time on the show is done now, and I think I've heard you say that you're kind of like, at least for the time being, not interested in writing for the show again anytime soon.
Yeah.
But what do you hope other writers will pick up from this? Like if they're going to specifically pick up on the things that you've established, are there any things that you would like to see people develop or explore other aspects of the Doctor through this lens?
No, I think it'd be really arrogant of me, and I know enough about Doctor Who, and I know enough about the Doctor Who history. I think you have to be very okay with you do your work on the show during your time, and the moment you step away and the moment you stop, then nothing is in your hands, and other people will come in, will contradict it, will change it, will alter it. And that's really, it's more than okay, because it would be very arrogant of me to sit here and go, well, what I really hope is they then expand the story into this and that and the other, given that I have taken the works of others and kind of turned it inside out and questioned it and then remolded some of the answers. I haven't remolded the work because everything those people did, the brilliant work that everybody before me has done, still applies very deliberately. And I worked really hard at that. And even, tying in things like Morbius Doctors and things like just as tiny little Easter eggs. But no, I don't expect. I have nothing to add or nothing to, no expectations, and I would imagine. I would imagine it will be ignored, contradicted, doubled back on. It could be anything, and also I think it's really important that for everyone, that's okay. That's again the incredible thing about Doctor Who, and in comparison to other shows or mythologies that are going on out there, it's very, very unfixed, mercurial. I think just one shouldn't have false expectations as much as anything else. It's like you can't guarantee. That's the thing that interested me, and I pursued that during my time. But it's not going to be the thing that's going to interest Russell, I don't think. I wouldn't expect that. I could be completely wrong. I know nothing, literally nothing, deliberately nothing. But yeah, I mean, are there thousands of stories you could tell in relation to Division? Oh yeah, completely. Are there stories about other Doctors you can tell? Yes, of course, but that doesn't mean that they should be at the center of the show moving forward, because actually that's the great thing. The renewal of the show and it is actually its strength. It really is, and I felt that when I came in, and feel it even more now. You just go, oh great, it's a whole massive hurricane of fresh air about to blow in. It's so exciting.
It's really interesting listening to these Chris Chibnall interviews with Reality Bomb and Radio Free Skaro. Like I said, you can listen to the full Reality Bomb interview in the description below. How humble he comes across, and just how modest and basically just how grounded he is as a writer and as a creator. Like, you get all of these stories and all of these people trying to say that Chris Chibnall's ego ruined Doctor Who and that he's trying to ruin everything and he wants to try and make his stamp permanent and he wants to try and all of this stuff, when he's basically saying, no, Doctor Who is incredibly mercurial. That's the word he uses, mercurial, when it's going to be ignored. Rusty Davies can do what he wants, and I was able to mess around with things, so by rights, other writers can do the same thing, and that's absolutely the correct approach to take. And, you know, Cobb and Chibnall W, this isn't the first time that Doctor Who has done this, though. For example, going back way early on in the classic series, when William Hartnell first regenerated into Patrick Troughton, through interviews and through expanded media and things like that, there was implications being laid down within the Doctor Who fandom and in the show itself that William Hartnell was not actually the first Doctor, that this regeneration was something that the Doctor had done before. It wasn't until much later on that, no, Hartnell is the first Doctor, Troughton's the second, Pertwee's the third, and then Tom Baker's the fourth, but oh no, there's the Morbius Doctors, where there's these other incarnations. These things are ignored and these things are changed all of the time. Even things from, like, the Seventh Doctor, the laying down of the Cartmel Master Plan, then the TV movie, the Doctor's half human on my mother's side, and then in the revival with Russell T Davies, they get rid of Gallifrey because of the Time War. They then change things later on through, they no longer have the Doctor be half human. Russell T Davies was originally going to write something saying there was like a 24-hour flu, you know, being half human, but he resisted that temptation, but he did still change things as he went along. Then when Stephen Moffat takes over in 2010, one of the first things that he does as showrunner is essentially retcon a lot of the massive invasions that Russell T Davies did during his tenure. The cracks in the universe were absorbing people's memories and sometimes just these events in general. He says in Flesh and Stone, a great big cyber king walks over Victorian London and no one even remembers. So a lot of Russell T Davies's era got retconned by the Moffat era. He then brings Gallifrey back, he retcons the Time War to an extent, and then Chibnall ends up destroying Gallifrey again and then establishing the Timeless Child, and he feels like he got out of that story what he wanted to. And while I think that there's a lot of missed potential on the table, and there's a few things that he could or should have handled differently, like the Fugitive Doctor, like the destruction of Gallifrey and all of these things, you know, I think that's subjective, and that's a conversation, but it's a different conversation from this one. The fact that Russell T Davies is going to presumably either build upon or ignore, do whatever he wants basically to what Chibnall has done, is just basically the standard procedure for Doctor Who. And I think it says a lot about people who are trying to view this as like a big thumbs down or disavowing of what Chibnall has done to the show, because yeah, Russell may ignore it, but Russell also ignored a lot of the stuff from the classic series. And also the TV movie. Does that mean that those things suck and are invalid? No, it's just the nature of show. It's just Doctor Who, as usual, being flexible and mercurial and evolving the way it does as the baton is passed from one showrunner and one producer and one script editor to the other. It's the cycle, it goes on. Now, I think that things like The Fugitive Doctor and Division and such, those can be expanded upon in expanded material. We're going to be seeing Big Finish expanding on the Sacha Dhawan Master and also on The Fugitive Doctor. We've seen Titan Comics do a Fugitive Doctor range talking about all of that stuff. You know, I wish a lot of that was on screen. I wish a lot of that was during the Chibnall era itself, but you know, this is standard operating procedure for the show in terms of passing it on to somebody else who is not obligated to carry it on, is not obligated to build upon it. They can do whatever they want, really. We know that Russell T Davies at least likes the idea of the Timeless Child, where all stories are true, all Doctors are canon. In the Rose Target novelization, there's that chapter where Rose is going through Clive's photos in his shed for all of these previous Doctors, and there's a Doctor in a wheelchair with a robot dog companion. There's a black woman with a flaming sword. You know, all of these different incarnations of the Doctor that Russ T Davies is playing around with. I can't remember if that was pre or post Timeless Child, but either way, he's messing around with the history of the show and the fundamentals. You know, it's fun. And the Valyard, Tolstoy as well. Now, the Valyard, I think, is maybe in a similar situation to the Timeless Child, where behind-the-scenes issues and stuff wound up resulting in that story not fully coalescing the way the creators probably wanted it to. I think a lot of Series 13 shortcomings in this department are to do with the fact that COVID severely restricted the type of stories that they could tell, or the initial trajectory of what Series 13 was going to be, but we're not going to know this for several years from now. And also, the Valeyard and the ending of The Trial of a Time Lord was upended by the death of Robert Holmes, and the arguments and the creative disputes behind the scenes got so heated that Eric Sayward, the script editor, he left over them. And then the show was kind of able to come back afterwards. But yeah, we're going to ignore all of that because we're basically hobbling along at this point with the Seventh Doctor, and we just want to try and get 4 more stories done this year. I think the chat's kind of on the same wavelength here. I think you can obviously have a discussion about whether or not the Timeless Child, the Fugitive Doctor, or Division, you can have a conversation about whether or not those things worked, but I think trying to frame this as Russell's ignoring it because it sucks, or Russell's ignoring it because Chibnall ruined the show, whatever, I think that's so short-sighted, and I also think that sort of ignores the whole point of Doctor Who, and basically the creative process in general. I'm sure that Russell will probably ignore a lot of what Chibnall did, just as what Chibnall did with Moffat and what Moffat did with Russell before. Or he might build upon some elements of it, or poke fun of it, or draw attention to it, or include it in. Who knows, maybe during Series 14, the Fugitive Doctor shows up for an episode or two. What was got across in that interview, and why I really, really highly recommend that you listen to the Reality Bomb interview, the full thing, link in the description below, it's like nearly 50 minutes long, we only played a few minutes of it, is that these parts of the Doctor Who universe, whether they were executed or not properly, you can still... They are still part of the Doctor Who universe now. Those are Chibnall's stamp on the franchise. The Fugitive Doctor, Division, Tecteun, and now that they're there, now that those pieces are on the game board, you can do whatever you want with them. You can ignore them, or you can build upon them. But the fact that they are now there means that there are now more story potentials. Even if you think that the Chibnall era is the worst thing ever, and we can have a discussion about that, I think it's pretty objectively true that there are now more story possibilities and story potential now than there was before Chris Chibnall started his run. Now, you can argue that whether or not they're good stories about whatever. I'm talking about just the pure, tangible, material reality of the show. There are now stories that you can tell with Division. There are now stories you can tell with a brand new incarnation of the Doctor played by a fantastic actor in Joe Martin. You now have a new incarnation of the Master, played by Sacha Dhawan, who, honestly, I think is the best Master incarnation of the revival. I love what they did with Missy in Series 10, but consistently, from beginning to end, Sacha Dhawan is my favourite revived series Master, and I have no shame in that. And you've got these new characters and companions with Yaz, Dan, Graham, Ryan, etc. You now have these story potential and possibilities and these characters that weren't in the Doctor Who universe a few years ago. And yeah, that's just part of the creative process. That's just how it goes. Like, for example, Stephen Moffat added the idea of the Silence, of the Alliance, which locked the Doctor in the Pandorica, all of that stuff. And added to the mystery of River Song and these other incarnations, Mel's, things like that. It's just part of the creative process. And, for example, just the fact that Chris Chibnall never utilised River Song during his tenure doesn't mean that River Song is erased, or that River Song was bad, or River Song should be ignored. It's just how it goes. And I think agenda pushing is really, really apparent when we have these conversations. Paternoster Gang, the War Doctor, exactly. These moments, these things, these ideas, they are stamped on the show by a creator, and it's up to the next creator in line whether or not they want to do anything with it. I do worry sometimes that this overly relaxed feeling over past events is going to lead Doctor Who to having an extremely muddled and jumbled history. Gallifrey and the Doctor's history are worrying examples. Honestly, Doctor Who has already got a massively muddled and jumbled history. If you take... Depending on how seriously you take the canon of Big Finish, the first Doctor and his granddaughter Susan created life on Earth. Like, you can ignore a lot of things, or you can embrace a lot of things. It's really down to the eye of the beholder. It's already an absolute clusterfluff. So, you can either take or leave whatever you want. For example, my headcanon is that Twice Upon a Time didn't happen. That's a televised episode of TV that I think was a 12th Doctor fever dream before he regenerated. Obviously, I'm not going to enforce that perspective or that headcanon on anybody else, but that's just sort of what happens when you have a show that's been running for, at this point, nearly 60 years. Doctor Who is probably the fandom that I am the deepest in, so I can't really claim to speak for what Star Wars or Star Trek or hardcore Marvel and DC comic book fans, what their approach is to it, but I think it's sort of quite similar, that you can sort of take or leave whatever you want, or you can sort of pick your favourites and pick and choose what your own personal canon is. I will say about Twice Upon a Time, though, I've not read it yet, but apparently the novelisation by Paul Cornell, I can't remember, is it? 1 second. By Paul Cornell. Apparently that's basically a significantly better version of the TV story. I've not read it yet. I've just heard that it's really, really, really good, and that I need to get around to listening to it. There is an audio novel read by... Who's read it? Read by Mark Gatiss. So I'll probably listen to it at some point, because I ain't got time. I've not got time for that fancy book learning. My headcanon, for example, is that Peri did die at the end of Mind Warp, and that the Inquisitor just said very nice things to the Sixth Doctor because he'd had a really shit day and didn't want to kick him while he was down. Now, if Peri appears in the 60th anniversary or whatever, I'll have to make some adjustments to that headcanon, of course, but for now, that's it, because it is mercurial, this is up for debate, this is in the eye of the beholder, and it's fun. I think it's fun to pick and choose and play favourites as long as you're not being a dickhead about it. How about like 12 and Clara lied to each other? Honestly, I've excised a lot of Hellbent from my memory, so I can't really remember what that debate is. She appeared in the Blu-ray trailer. Those, I can pick and choose. That's not canon. It's a cool thing, and I'm glad that Nicola Bryant got to reprise the role again, and it made for a really cool trailer, but I don't think that's canon. There we go. Just like I don't think, unless they're able to really justify it, that the new Big Finish box set with the Third Doctor reuniting with an older Jo Jones, who has recently been widowed with Cliff, I don't think that's canon. You know, I'll listen to it and I'll enjoy it, and maybe if it really justifies the existence of those box sets and re-establishing that relationship, I'll reassess that. This is something that is, you know, in a state of flux. Death in Heaven is the one they lied to. Oh yeah. They lied to each other. Both of them lied to each other in Death in Heaven. Yeah, I like the ending of Death in Heaven. I like that ending for them.